So today I want to talk about parent voice. I've spoken about pupil voice, but actually parent voice is also incredibly important and can be overlooked. It's mentioned in the Code of Practice, it was mentioned earlier in the Lamb inquiry, but it's important that we listen to the voice of parents, because what we gain from the parents we might not gain in any other way. I'm going to start with how not to do it, okay? This is a personal experience going back to when my oldest son was in year 5, and I started the parents' evening. I went to the parents' evening and the teacher turned around to me and said, "My son's name is horrible." And I just looked at her, excuse me, and then she repeated it. She said, "My son's name is horrible," and went on to say he was doing this, 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 this and this. After a while, she went through all his behaviours, and she was talking about it as though it was the worst behaviour she'd ever encountered, which, quite frankly, having been a teacher myself, that is not the worst behaviour she would have encountered. But I then said, "Look, do you think this could be related to the fact that, you know, his granddad has got leukemia and they're very close, and, you know, he hasn't got long left to live, and we go there regularly, he's up at night often, you know." And the teacher turned around to me and said, "Oh, do you think he's playing on that?" I said, "No, I think he loves his granddad, and I think he's actually really upset and not getting any sleep." Anyway, I walked out of that parents' meeting and basically sat down and sobbed. I was just devastated. Stupidly, the teacher hadn't remembered that I was a governor at the school, special needs governor, and I went straight and saw the head about it. But it was an awful experience. Another experience, funnily enough with the same child, but totally different, another caution, should I say, was when we were called in for a meeting, and the head teacher, it was a new head teacher to the school, and she started describing these, again, behaviours of our son, and we just didn't recognise it, not at all. And she was giving us strategies, and we were thinking, well, maybe at school he behaves totally differently. This is when he was very young, he was in infant school, and he was a good kid, you know, he wasn't a kid who misbehaved or anything. And anyway, turns out suddenly the secretary came in and she was talking about somebody else with the same name, same first name, and it wasn't our son at all. Now that was firstly embarrassing, secondly awkward, and thirdly, she actually mentioned the name of the person she had meant to be talking about. So these days that would be breaching all sorts of codes. So those are two cautions of what not to do. So it's important to remember that we are talking about a child, and we are talking about a child to that child's parents. So we need to think about how they will be feeling. We need to really consider, this is their son, this is their daughter, how might they be feeling when we give them this information? We might be sharing stuff for the first time, concerns that we have that they hadn't even been aware of. Or we could be the ones saying, "Have you considered this?" And they're just so relieved. "Oh gosh, you know, we thought we were going mad, nobody else has believed us." So you can get all sorts of reactions. The thing about talking with the parents is not only that they have a right to be informed, but also they can give us valuable information. There are girls with AS who we wouldn't have seen any signs of it at school, and then the parents will say, "Look, can I speak to you? I'm having real problems with so-and-so at home, this, and it could turn out that the child, especially true with girls, has been masking everything at school, has been trying desperately to fit in, when actually they're going home and then just having a total meltdown because the stress of fitting in all day at school is just too much. And it can actually be that at home all the behaviours are coming out. So sometimes we describe a child at school and the parents are like, "Well, that's not my child," and they feel so frustrated when they're not believed. So sometimes it could be about parenting styles, it could be that there are no boundaries or whatever, and at school there are boundaries, so there are issues, but these need detailed, careful, considered conversations, not just totally ignoring what the parent says. What the parent tells us can be really, really important for the development of the child. Likewise, when we've put in an intervention, we need to feed back to the parents, because it's possible that the child is saying, yes, 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 that's fine, great, great, great. And actually at home, they're going home saying, I can't stand it when this happens, it is really annoying. So the parental feedback can be incredibly helpful if we're going to put the right interventions in place for the child. So again, what I said before, it's about how we bring up a subject with a parent. So I've talked before about the Kathy Hoopman books, for example. They're one way in where you can look at the book and say, look, are there any things here you recognise in your child? And you can have a discussion. It could be that we need permissions to do certain assessments. It could be that we need permissions to make referrals, or we need them to see a GP, them to have a hearing test done. It could be whatever. But we need to have the parents on board. Now, what I do, and it seems time consuming at the time, but I always set aside a good hour for that first meeting, because that can actually save me so much time in the long run. When you have that initial meeting, whether it be to raise a concern, to discuss assessments, whatever it is, you've known that information for some time. You're also familiar with dealing with it as the Senko, as the teacher. You're like, oh yeah, this is what I do. But for the parent, it's the first time hearing it quite often. So there needs to be time for them to process the information, for you to say something more than once so that it is absorbed, properly processed. You need to do it in a care and considered way. Whenever I set up a meeting with a parent, especially a first meeting, but most meetings, I would have discreetly a box of tissues on the table, a glass of water or a cup of tea or coffee or whatever, but putting the parent at ease. You raise your concerns, but you also ask what they want. Is there anything you want to share with me before we start this meeting? You need to control the meeting. You need to be aware of the time. It's useful if at the beginning of the meeting you can say, right, I'm teaching again at 2 o'clock, so we've got a full hour, which is great, but I will have to go at that. If we need to discuss things further, we can set up another meeting. But have a boundary, have a time-bound meeting. Otherwise, these things can go on for a very long time. You want to allow sufficient time, but you do need to have a clear boundary at the end of it. There's also sometimes you might need another adult in the room, depending on the conversation and depending on the parent. I've had parents who are quite frankly a bit scary, and I've just had another adult in with me, another professional, just so that there are two of us, so that anything is said, we know what's been said, we've heard it with two different voices. It's useful to have an outline of what you want to discuss. If you can inform the parent of some of the areas you want to discuss in advance, that gives them a chance to be prepared. I also think it's really important, after hearing the parent's voice, to then minute the meeting. So I usually just do date of the meeting, who was present, matters discussed, and then just do bullet points. And then I will send that home to be signed. I will sign it and send it home to be signed by the parent. That way it covers us for, as teachers. If they say, well, you never told me this. No, well, actually I did, and you've signed that that's what we said. But also it's a reminder for them and a reminder for us. It's important at the end, if there are any action points, to have literally just, action, and then the points, bullet points, what they are, initials of who's to do it, and time bound, when is this going to be done. So these are things that are just really helpful when you're having meetings with parents. As I say, it's important to remember that the child is their child, and there's an emotional attachment to that child that we might not necessarily feel, depending on the child, depending on us and all the rest of it. But they are in a different position, so not your child is horrible. Don't ever tell somebody their child is horrible, please. You're going to cause an awful lot of stress, and you're not going to build a good working relationship. You can say, I'm concerned about some of the behaviours your child is displaying. Do you think there's any cause for that? Is there anything we should know? So have that open dialogue, that hour for that first meeting, if you can do it. Not everyone can get that time cleared in their timetable, but if you can, an hour for that first meeting. It doesn't have to last the hour, but if you've got the hour, it gives you time to actually get a decent discussion going and to get them on side. Having done that, you can then have lots of short meetings afterwards and just touching base, because you've built that trust and that relationship. If that meeting involves going through assessments, it's important to remember that we know what percentiles are, we know what standardised scores mean, but the parent may not. So simply explain it so that they know what we're talking about. Don't just go, oh, they got this, you know. That can be very confusing for a parent. Also, oh, they got this in this test, but what's that assessment for? The parent will need explaining. I know that the BPVS is about receptive vocabulary, but they may not know what receptive vocabulary means. So we need to actually explain what the assessment is, why we've used it, and what the findings tell us. Okay, so again, without treating the parent as though they're an idiot, quite obviously, making sure they've understood. So you need time to ensure that there is understanding on your part as well as theirs, that you've listened, that you've taken note of all the key things, you've recorded it, and you've been sensitive to the fact that this is their child. And you've really valued their contribution to how you can work together in partnership to support their child. Thank you.